This, my friends, of course, is the Tamron 150-500 F5-6.7. This is an extreme telephoto lens for Sony E-mount cameras, a very welcomed addition for the community. And this is not my full in-depth review. This is kind of a half, maybe 3/4 review of my experience with this lens so far. And the reason for that is I really think that this lens deserves to be put through its paces fully. I think this is going to be a great addition, and I think this lens really deserves to have that thorough review so you guys can make the best decision, because being a great budget option, it's still not cheap. So I'm trying to unpack this as I can. I've shot several thousand photos so far with this. I've gotten into some video with it, and I have to say it's quite good. It is very good. You might have seen my first impressions of this lens. If not, I'll throw that up there somewhere. And this is just about my experience with it so far. I'm really loving it. And let's just dive right in and show you some of the photos that I've taken with this thing. Before we dive into some more of the specifics, show you the handling and some of the performance in a bit more detail. Here you go. So there's some shots with this bad boy. Let me know what you think down in the comments. I love to hear from you guys, of course. And yeah, so far I think that this is definitely gonna live up to the weight and of course the price, because it's not cheap. It is $1,399 US, but it is one of the cheaper options that we do have for Sony E-mount cameras. Now, it's not perfect by any means, but it is going to be a great option, I think, moving forward for most people looking to definitely get started in birding, in sports, in wildlife photography, or anybody that's just maybe on a budget and looking to not drop $2,500 US on maybe the G Master. And or if you don't maybe perhaps want that huge 200 to 600, but again, we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about where this thing fits in and what I recommend for which kind of use case. So first of all, I have to say it is a bit heavier than I expected, but with heaviness comes quality, and it does have great optical quality, which we'll get into. As you saw, it's quite sharp. It's actually surprisingly sharp, and I will show you some test charts of this thing. It actually really surprised me. Definitely way out at 500 millimeters. This thing really shines where it matters. Now, there are a couple downsides as well, and most notably, there is no teleconverter for this guy currently, and there probably won't be for Sony E-mount cameras. So you can use crop mode and get out to about 750 millimeter equivalent, but you're not going to be able to throw on a 2 times or a 1.4 times teleconverter and then go ahead and use your crop mode as well. It's just one of the limitations of this lens. But other than that, the handling, it actually feels pretty good. In my first overall first impressions video, I did mention that it does kind of have this lock switch just by pulling forward. And that did kind of bug me at first because I'm not used to having that. So when I did go to, zoom in and out really quickly, it kind of got stuck and I'm going, what's going on? Well, that feature has really grown on me, and I really like the fact that I can just, if it's hanging down, just bang, nail that thing forward, or just lock my focal length exactly where I want it, so that if I need to take a break or something, it's definitely not going to move if I'm hand holding and want to put it down. So I really like that feature. It also does have a lock switch, but yeah, so far that thing has grown on me, and I don't find it burdensome or annoying at all. So this lens, as you know, does extend as you zoom, and it appears to be quite well weather sealed. I have used it in several very dusty, kind of sandy locations, and it stood up perfectly so far. Of course, it has been only a few weeks or so, but I think the weather sealing is adequate. It feels really good. Again, it is a little bit heavy for what it is, but that means you can probably bet that it's gonna have, you know, some decent performance packed in there. All the buttons and switches, they're really great. They respond well and they're easy to use. This is kind of a lens, if you are just kind of getting into photography, it's not gonna have a huge learning curve. You can pick it up. It's gonna pretty much perform right out of the box. And I think that's a huge plus for a lot of people. One of my very first major lens purchases was actually a 150-600 for my old Canon mount, and that really got me going. So this is a great lens, and you can rest assured, although it is heavy, it's gonna perform right out of the box, and it does perform. So let's dive in and have a more detailed look at some of the photos and some of the sharpness results that I did get with this lens, and I think you're gonna be pleasantly surprised. So as promised, here's a look at the sharpness in more detail of this lens. Here we are at 150 millimeters, and we're not going to get into too much of the crazy detailed optic performance as you'll see in my full in-depth review coming up here. This is just to get you an idea about how good this lens really is optically. Now at 150 millimeters here, obviously we don't buy it for the short end, we buy it for the long end. It's a telephoto lens. But this lens does perform very well in the center at 150 millimeters wide open at f5. Like really sharp, really nice, no complaints there. As you can see, there is quite a bit of distortion here. There's a little bit of vignetting to note, nothing too crazy, but the corners are nothing special at 150 millimeters. So do note that, and of course, as we stop down, it's going to improve a little bit. Here at 300 is a totally different story. Our maximum aperture now is f5.6. As you can see, the center is really nice and sharp, great contrast, really impressive if you ask me. And the corners are equally. This is where this lens starts to kind of blow my mind. This is a great performance out of, well, a budget lens, let's be honest. For what's available and the comparables, this is a budget lens, and this is a phenomenal performance at 300 millimeters wide open. So really happy to see that, but let's jump in all the way out to 500 and see what we're dealing with. Okay, so here we are at 500 millimeters, all the way zoomed in. This is wide open. Now our maximum aperture is f6.7. So a little bit slower than probably most of us were hoping, but let's have a look at the optical performance. In the center, very sharp. We might not have quite the contrast that we do if we just kind of go down a little bit in focal length, but it's completely and absolutely adequate. Very sharp. Now the corners here are actually just as impressive. I could not believe the corners here wide open at 500 millimeters. So optically, this thing is very good, and its worst performance being at 150 millimeters. And of course, every single lens is gonna be a little bit different. They're not all gonna perform the same, but I'm really happy because of course, most of the shots that you're gonna take with this lens are most likely past 300 for sure, and most likely all the way out at around 500. Now, one thing to note here about the aperture range, if you stop down just the tiniest little bit, even about 20 millimeters, on the long end, you're gonna get into that f6.3. So if you go all the way up to 500 and just back off the tiniest little bit, you will get that third of a stop of light back. So you could really almost consider this lens an f6.3. It's just the very last few millimeters that you're gonna get into the f6.7 range. Just something to note. Now, of course, this lens does have image stabilization, but it's definitely not groundbreaking. It's not going to be really comparable in my experience to, say, the Sony 100-400 or the 200-600. So, of course, it is very much welcomed in here, but yeah, it does not perform flawlessly or the best that I've ever seen. But again, keep price in mind. Now, getting back to the weight of this guy real quick. Now, a couple people were asking me, is this gonna be a fatiguing lens over time? And the answer is, yeah, probably. If you are a smaller person or if you have a disability or something, having this thing around your neck for any period of time for several hours is definitely gonna fatigue you. It does have some heft to it, so do keep that in mind. So a few last things I wanted to touch on. It does have a relatively impressive minimum focus distance at 150 millimeters, but it is variable as you extend the lens. At 150 millimeters, however, it's about 2 feet and you can get some really decent macro-like shots as you see here. But do keep in mind as you extend out that zoom all the way out to 500, that minimum focus distance is going to increase exponentially. And lastly, everything's looking pretty good, but what about the autofocus? And that's what I really want to do a deep dive in the full in-depth review, so keep an eye out for that. But I can say that it is capable, but it's definitely not the best that there is on the market, and definitely not a replacement if you're an utmost professional needing that insane hit rate that you're going to find in the G Master. So there you have it, guys. There's my thoughts on this big, beautiful beast so far. Again, I really hope you join me for my full in-depth review on it. Make sure you drop down all your questions and your comments. I'm trying to do my best in answering and putting everything that you want to see out of this lens into my review. So I hope you like this video, and I hope you join me for the next one, guys. If you did like it, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. Join the community, and like always, make mistakes, be yourself, and get out there and take some more pictures. See you next time.